Hey class, I thought let's do a little bit on this work, a little work on this word Jewish, Judaism, Jewishness, as you head into the readings. Um, I'm busy grading a ton of stuff. I've got 3 courses. You can see right there. There's my spring agenda. Maybe I should hide that. Oh, and we'll hide this too. All right, we'll get back to the earth. Um, and so I'm grading a lot of things right now. Will be making my way. I think I got through the first 2 projects so far, maybe a few more than that even. And I'll send you an email when I'm done grading it so you know when it's there. And so let's just have a look here at the beginning of your book. Can you imagine spending an entire 2.5 pages just trying to get to a definition of Jewish that works? Uh, Here's something funny for those of you who, like me, were raised in Wyoming. If you were raised on the East Coast, if you were raised in an area that has a large Jewish population, you'd already know all of this. You'd get all of this. You'd know there were cultural Jews. You'd know there were religious Jews. You'd know there were Orthodox Jews, and that you would see the men who have a special forelock. They have special rules about how to wear their forelock on the streets, living a very traditional life. You would know that John Stewart was Jewish. You would know that his roommate from college, was it Senator Weiner, who so tragically tweeted images of himself this last year, was his Jewish roommate. It would all be laughed at under the kind of shtick of a tragic Jewish comedy. There's a whole world of knowledge about the richness of Jewish culture, of Jewish intellectuals, of Jewish humor, of Jewish theater, movies. There's this whole world that knows this, what your book is trying to tell you about race, religion, culture, or a nation. What does the word Jewish mean? But when you grow up in Wyoming, you really haven't got a clue. So by the end of this chapter, you will have a clue. I just want to walk you through this first part in case it's such a mouthful, right? So the Jewish race, could you call it are Jews a race? Here's one of the nice big puzzle pieces to understand with Judaism, that in terms of Europe and the origins of Judaism, right, in the Middle East, there are basically 2 large regional groupings for Judaism. The Sephardic, and when you hear that word, you should think Spain, Mediterranean, Middle East, and Northern Africa, right? This is where the oldest of Judaism would have come from. But then, over time, Jews traveled up to Northern Europe, and that's where you get this whole second group, the Ashkenazic Jews, and Ashkenazic is the Hebrew word for Germany. So the Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, they came up for a word for the more northern group, Ashkenazic, and the more southern group, the Sephardic, right? Now, we all know, I think at this point, that the idea of races amongst humans has no meaningful data behind it, right? That there are wild things, and I should have looked this up first. I didn't, but there are wild things, like there's a chance we share more genes, more chromosomes with some primates than maybe with other humans that look like us even, or something like that. Let's just pretend I didn't just say that. But the point is, the idea of race holds no water anymore. We know there are chromosomal differences. We know there are genetic things that happen and tendencies and this and that. But the idea that there are races of humans is pretty much vacuous. Doesn't work. So we can get right over the idea that there's a race called Jews, particularly since we know that with this southern Ashkenazic and this northern, southern Sephardic, northern Ashkenazic origins, that there's already going to be a lot of difference, right? From hair, skin, um, who's got a tan, who doesn't, okay? So we're going to move right past the idea that being Jewish is part of a race question. Now the culture question is there a kind of cultural Jewishness? It's a great way to think about it. The book also tells us you can't just call it cultural, right? We're in the West, and there's kind of a Western culture, maybe. Is there something more? Yes, there is more, but there are plenty of folks who are pretty happy to describe themselves as cultural Jews, and part of what they're trying to say is, I'm not building Purim huts, and I am not, my wife doesn't shave her head like a good Orthodox Jewish woman might do. And, but I love my Broadway, my collection of Jewish inspired and Jewish performed Broadway musicals. Right? There's a real celebration of the cultural wealth of people who were Jewish. And many people are happy to identify as cultural Jews. All right. Yiddish. There's a chance you guys have heard plenty of these, of Yiddish words, like shtick. He's got a real comedy shtick. And oy vey, oy vey. If you're ever watching Woody Allen movies, you're going to start seeing these phrases coming in, and you're likely to hear them then as Yiddish. It's a Northern European language, folk language, that gets carried on and celebrated as the old world shining through. But as our book also tells us, the Ladino is the name for the kind of folk language of the Sephardic Jews. So there's a whole other dialect and lingo. But we didn't get as much of that. It was the Northern European Jews who have mostly influenced United States culture. All right. So cultural issues. Then they kind of conclude here, and our book does this a lot, right? It sets you up, let's look at this, let's look at this, let's look at this, and then it brings you to their answer, okay? You guys get to be good hermeneutes of suspicion and decide whether or not you like that answer, but that's what they've done here. To conclude here on 305, that a comprehensive way of understanding Jewishness, of understanding what it means to be a Jew. Jewish people as a whole share the common ideas of ancestry, and this is very important, that Jewishness is passed on from the mother. So if your mother is Jewish, you're automatically Jewish. Culture, a long tradition of theological study, philosophical study, movement into a love of the book and of learning that then flourished during the Haskalah, the Enlightenment, the Jewish Enlightenment, and it means a very high representation amongst the arts, in the universities, fine artistry, so a very rich tradition of Jewish culture, and then the interconnectedness that even if you were born to a Jewish family in Casper, Wyoming, you would have a sense of interconnection to the Diary of Anne Frank. You would know that this is part of your heritage, your peopledom, and that the story of the Exodus and the idea of let my people go, and a people who had to travel through the desert after they had fled from slavery in Egypt. These kinds of ideas, you would feel a strong connection to belonging, a sense of belonging. So for those of us who like to think that one of the best ways to understand religious identities is that what they do more than anything else is provide you an overarching sense of a meta story, gives you your past. Where did we come from? In the case of Judaism, you've got the Old Testament, you've got a creation story. What do we do now? You have the laws of kosher, you have secular Jews not caring about whether they're eating pork or not, maybe. That everybody gets to decide their own thing on that, right? I'll get back to it. Jewishness. What a religious identity gives you an overarching sense of belonging to your community. In this case, that's going to include your ancestry, your culture, and the interconnectedness you feel, especially in a world after the Holocaust, with the victimization and the need to fight against that ever happening again to a people, the Holocaust. So, this religious identity, it gives you your sense of your past, a creation story, and even if you were a cultural Jew, you might not want to go with Old Testament 7 days of creation, but you would go with, my people were the ones who wrote it down in the book about the Old Testament, right? That's where I come from. A current ethic regarding how to live in the world. In a post-Holocaust world, for pretty much all Jews, part of that ethic will include never allowing that kind of a Holocaust to happen again. And what religious identities give you as well is that future orientation. What is the significance of my death for my community? And so in terms of Judaism, maybe I'm a secular Jew, but when my life becomes a part of this rich Jewish cultural heritage, and my children will know it, and so there is a meaning in your death that applies to the value of your whole community. All right, so let's get after history. We always start with our history and geography, and I hope you enjoy this section. So with that, I'll say goodbye.